Y a todos los que hoy nos acompañan en esta, la última
Good
plenaria.
morning. A cordial welcome to all of you who are with us today in this, the last plenary session of the 25th Congress of the IRSCL 2021, Aesthetic and Pedagogical Entanglements, organized by the Center for Educational Justice of the Pontificia Catholic University of Chile, and supported by the Schools of Education and Literature, and in collaboration with Universidad O'Higgins. On this occasion, Magda Sepúlveda, an academic from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, will present a paper entitled The Round, a Spatial Repossession and Political Agency, Gabriela Mistral. We also thank those who help us with simultaneous interpretation and sign language interpretation. We remind you that you can leave your questions to us in the YouTube chat, which we will forward to our keynote speaker at the end of her presentation. And so to begin, it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for this plenary, Felipe Munita. Felipe Munita has a PhD in Language and Literature Didactics from the Autonomous University of Barcelona, a university where he was also a visiting professor. He's been a consultant and teacher in international training programs for reading mediators, and he's currently a professor and researcher at the School of Education of Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. His lines of research revolve around the reading mediator, literary education, and poetry for children and young people. He's currently leading the research project Readers and Mediators of Poetry, Teacher Training and Poetry Reading Practices in Secondary Education. He's a member of the Gretel Group. Felipe, go ahead. Thank you, Christian, for that introduction. And also thank you, Magda, for accepting our invitation to be part of Entramados Estéticos y Pedagógicos. We are very happy to have you as the final speaker at this Congress and that you can talk to us about Gabriela Mistral's work. Magda Sepúlveda is Professor of Literature at the conference's host institution, Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, and a Research Associate at the Center for Contemporary Latin Studies at the University of Edinburgh. She's directed important projects funded by Chile's research agency, ANID, and has written several books, including Chile Urbano 2013, which brings together leading North American and Chilean researchers in dialogue about the image of the country in films such as Tony Manero and women's narratives such as novels by Nona Fernández. Her second book, Ciudad Quiltra 2017, an essay on Chilean poetry produced from 1973 to 2013, won the Creation Award from the Ministry of Arts and Cultures, establishing the relevance of Mapuche poetry and the rebellion of women poets against gender stereotypes. Her latest book, Gabriela Mistral, Somos, los Andinos que Fuimos, 2018, studies the relationship of poet Gabriela Mistral with the ecological and cultural system of the Andes. This last book was selected by the National Authors Acquisition Program of the State of Chile to be distributed to all public libraries in the country. Welcome, Magda. You can start whenever you like. Thank you, Felipe. And I thank all friends at the Congress, and especially Macarena, who's worked very hard these days. This presentation has to do with the round and political agency. I begin. My friend Ricardo says he does not know how to dance, but he moves his hands and dances. He walks, and I see that he dances. His body seeks to move, to express itself beyond himself, because our body sometimes does more than what we want, and sometimes less than what we want. Perhaps it's time to think about the relationship between our body and education. Is the body educated? Of course, yes, but more from surveillance and rejection rather than freedom and good treatment towards our materiality. I believe that Gabriela Mistral, the Chilean poet who gained the Nobel Prize, proposes challenges to teach us to enjoy our body in relation to the physical spaces where we live. She had a pedagogical knowledge where experience with your body and outside the classroom was essential to develop confidence with children. The poet advocated child education when in Chile, only in 1920, a law was passed obliging parents to send their children to primary school. Some of the things that she said continue to motivate our discussions in pedagogy, such as the seriousness and the place of the body into the teaching learning process. And before the serious education teacher that avoids contact, Gabriela Mistral opposes another view. To educate, the first thing is to kill the throne and loosen your frown, your serious frown. When this is done, then the party begins. There is nothing better than unleashed confidence, and this must help us to relax. The position of the teacher without a throne, the ignorant teacher that trusts in living subjective experience in context, allows opening up the fragility of the teacher and student, fostering space for both. Tender poetry book, the first edition of 1924 and the second, increased by her author in 1945, continues the essential poems for body education of children. There, she conceives bodies in relation to the territory, understanding that our materiality exists attracted by the earth and that we intervene with our body. Mistral bets on tenderness with an experience where the body is one that experiences, with a relationship between motor activity and emotion and relations. And in this way, a key role is played by hearing and dancing. In the poem La Tierra, or the Earth, which I will put up here, Mistral invites us to develop listening from the position of lying the body on the earth. The ear is open to listen to the rivers, the sound of animals, and the rhythm of human labor. Who is, for Mistral, in this poem, the privileged subject of this listening? Let us read the poem and observe on whom does the poet places this trust in listening. Indian child, if you are tired, you lie on the ground. Wondrous things are heard to the Indian drum of the earth. Roll and roll, the rivers are heard. The animals can be heard, and the sound of Indian looms, threshing and feasts. The privileged subject of this listening is an indigenous child that Mistral causes Indian, following the use of her time that repeated Christopher Columbus's historical era, that thinking that he'd reached the India. She addresses the indigenous child, not to give the child instructions, but to value their experience of lying on the earth with their bodies, placing this at the service of listening. What does the indigenous child hear? The child begins listening to nature, rivers, and animals, and moves toward listening his culture, the sound of the looms and indigenous festivities. What is the sound of the looms? I know the Mapuche loom, which is the loom of the major indigenous group in today's Chile, and that until today demands their land be returned. And this is the sound.
Entonces aquí se luce la postproducción y muestra el video.
And so now we will hear a video.
No sé si se escucha porque en mi computador no se escucha.
Esta lana es teñida con la ruda y la hoja de durazno y menta verde. y este otro es con el pompón del pellín, y esto es blanco natural. Y esto que está acá, con esto se urde, entonces este se llama el tonón. Sin el tonón no se puede urdir, no se puede tejer, hay que hacer esto. Esta es la tabla que se le llama el balampague, donde uno baja las lanas y las pasa para allá y para acá. Y este es el ñirehue, el que va dentro acá cuando uno está urdiendo. Y esto le llaman tonón, para ir haciéndolo.
The woman is explaining how to use the loom and weave.
Pero también tengo mi telar que con el primero que tejía es el mapuche, pues tengo todos mis palos, mis ñirehues, tengo todo. Y ahora como que mandé a hacer esto para modernizarme más.
Señora Avelina, ¿cuántos años lleva trabajando más o menos en lo que es el telar mapuche?
Ahí lo podemos dejar porque
15,
ustedes
20
escucharon
años.
este sonido ¡pum!
Pero aprendí desde niña a tejer, pero tuve otro
She
periodo.
explains that she learned to weave as a child.
Entonces nosotros escuchamos el sonido
And
del
so
mapuche implica bajar
we heard
y apisonar la lana.
that
El poema
the wool must be stamped on before it's woven. And the sound of the loom is very strong, and in some cultures it could be a daily sound. So Mistral promotes education where the body tends and develops its listening, and in that listening the sounds of household and community chorus appear. In Chilean words, we could say, listen to the sound of the rattle of your home and your community. The memory of sounds that fill our life allow us to invoke them when we need them. What song do you like? What instrument attracts your attention? What is the instrument to which the child relates? And so, here we continue with the poem, and the first verse, as you see, there is an instrument that appears, the drum, and the Indian is calling it, and the drum answers. It beats near and beats far, like someone who flees and returns. And so this is a sort of the sound of the loom.
The Indian drum and the child have a relationship. They are part of the playlist of the child. The drum always answers because its sound memory summons him. The melody is in our body, goes beyond the mind. Even in cases of Alzheimer's, a rhythm like that can go beyond your awareness. The melody takes us to the place always present of music. Within the poem, The Earth, it is the mother who is about to die. The mother asked her child to lie on the ground and that he listens to the sound of nature and of his home environment. So at the time of her death, there is auditory memory. Mistral gives voice to that dying mother in this text for children. How does this mother communicate her death that is soon to come? When I die, don't cry, son. Breast to breast, put yourself with her. And if you hold your breath as if it were all or nothing, you will hear her arm go up that held me and that gives me away. And the mother that was broken, you will see her return as whole. Mistral assumes in this poem the topic of death as subject for children, coming out of a taboo created by adults, as the scholar Macarena Garcia explains when she describes the situation after a reading mediation with the album book, The Mother and Death. And I quote, she had realized that they like to talk about death, and I did it in a totally natural way. In this poem, the mother, in face of her approaching death, shows her son another great mother, the earth, and gives him the power of the sound memory. The dying mother described the earth as a holy back. The dying mother describes the earth as a holy back on which those who walk and those who sleep go, the one that carries the living and carries the dead. Adding also a musical element that you can observe in this poem. All takes all carries the holy back of the earth, what walks, what sleeps, that which frolics, that which grieves, and it carries the living and it carries the dead, the Indian drum of the earth. The poem makes equivalent the earth to the Indian drum, a subject that refers to the Mapuche culture. This ethnic group defines itself as people who speak the language of the earth. Let us listen the sound of the Mapuche drum to help us with the sonorous senses of this poem.
Entonces nos damos cuenta cómo en el poema hay
we realize how in the poem there is a sound memory that is being produced. And this has to do with a very specific culture, the musicality. The child lies down next to the earth as his dead mother, but not to see her dead and broken, but as a whole resurrected in a larger belonging, the community of which the griever can be called son. Understanding the earth as a sonorous space leads for Mistral to a sense of belonging to one's community through the sounds that are not common. The mother that does not die is the community, but therein lies our difficulty as contemporary subject. What's our community? The classmates we studied with when we were young, the neighborhood council, the neighborhood friends, they're all communities, but we rarely represent them in the education that privileges the heteronormal family. Mistral's Ternura texts are addressed to indigenous and poor children. She invites his children to listen to the sounds of their culture, as it happens in Canción Quechua, Quechua song. I'm going to show the poem. Mistral is highlighting the language of the indigenous groups in the Andes region, which is a language that is active in many communities of Peru, Chile, Colombia, and Argentina. In this lullaby, Mistral teaches the child community identification through hearing, adding dance. What soundscape is remembered in Canción Quechua? Where was Tiwantinsuyo? The Indians were born. We arrived at the Puna with dances, with hymns. Quenas whistled. 2,000 live fires, they sank golden colliers and blessed amautas. You came down blind with suns, flying asleep to find the air widowed of Lama and Indian. and where cornfields were to see wheat rise, and instead of vicunias to find the steers. In this poem, the soundscape is composed by Andean hymns and the quena, or Andean flute. The Andean hymns addressed to the sun and its descendant on earth, the Inca, are sung by the Collas, or prominent women, and the Amauras, or educators. The soundscape of Canción Quechua takes place in a specific territory named in the first verse, the Inca space, the Tiwantinsuyu, one of whose territories or district was Chile. The speaker in the poem feels that he belongs to Tiwantinsuyu and recalls a landscape of sound and motor sensory landscape. Mistral situates the sensory motor gesture before the Spanish colonization, which was also a colonization of the body. In the four suyos, there was a way of walking, a dance, the ascent to the Andes Mountains. The poet imagines the dance ascending the Cordillera, the range, accompanied by quenas and the chants of the Collas and the Amautas. The poem, Canción Quechua, is in the part Lullabies of Ternura. Does it matter that Canción Quechua is conceived as a song to put a baby to sleep? Is there any relationship between the dream world and Canción Quechua? I think so. It is about making the child sleep, making him, her participate in the memory of the past as if it were a dream. The lullaby is recorded in the unconscious, the repertoire of a melody for that youngster. Perhaps some were sung too much, sleep, child, go to sleep now. There was the wolf will come and eat you. Then today, fear guides their personal and political choices. On the contrary, Canción Quechua is to have the baby sleep with the memory of the feast. What community feast does each one of us have in our memory? What Andean feast rhythm do I have in my memory? Let me share this contemporary song by the Chilean singer Pascuala y la Vaca. This gives us the idea of a feast.
Que me hace rico, tengo un baile que me hace zampa, tengo un siku que está bendito. La mina minería y se llevó mi huermi masí. Sin mi compañera. Mi dignidad en moneda se gasta como una rueda, se rueda como la tierra, girando malherida. Pero cuando hay carnaval, mi zaina me sonará. Taquina collaruna, tusuna collaruna. Taquina collaruna, tusuna collaruna. Taquina collaruna.
Oh, muchas gracias. Qué hermoso, además.
Thank you.
Como Katy me emocionó, como Katy hace.
How beautiful. It's so moving. It's just like a carnival. I was so moved about it. In front of the Andean party that happened in the past, Canción Quechua, I'll go back to Canción Quechua. Canción Quechua poses a desolate present, where the baby, when it arrives to the world, finds widowed the heirs of Lama and Indian. That's to say, it's born where the great indigenous depopulation has already happened. Mistral associates this to changes in the eating habit and sowing. 4, where cornfields used to be, to see wheat rise, and instead of vicuna, to find steers. The change from corn to wheat and from vicuna cattle to cattle is presented by Mistral as nefarious. Various aspects of bodily sensorium, listening, dancing, and eating are taught through the lullaby, but not in a deterritorialized manner, but with a territorial political agenda consisting of recovering and valuing the Andean community. The children's texts created by Gabriela Mistral seek for children to recover their territories, and from there exercise a political agency that validate cultures to which they belong. Ternura's Rondas chapter seeks to fundamentally position the round in the mountain. The children's bodies will repopulate that scenario that was widowed the heirs of Lama and Indian. The first poem of the chapter Rondas is called Invitación, Invitation, and consists precisely in motivating the dance in the mountain. This is the poem. According to this poem, what does the walk in the mountain achieve? What child does not want the round that is in the hills to come? Those who lag behind are seeing by the slope to climb. We came searching and searching through vineyards, sheepfolds, pine woods, and they all joined in singing. And the choir makes the valley whiten. The we in the poem invites children to climb up the hills singing and appreciates in that sung walk the possibility of union and formation of a collective. That group of dancers in the mountain is the collective that was being sought. The collective unites children of the mountain vineyards, which could be found in the Elqui Valley, where Mistral's childhood took place, the children of the sheepfolds or places where the cattle herders are gathered, sheepfolds that could be located in places close to Santiago and in the central zone of Chile, and the children of the pine forests, which could be the Araucaria forests in the Andean Mapuche zone. The Andes range is the one that causes the big collective. The ronda or round is valued by Mistral for its ability to bring children together and motivate them to occupy their territories, especially the mountains. To understand what it means to unite for the poet, we'll listen to the round, Dame la mano, give me your hand. Give me your hand and we will dance. Give me your hand and you will love me. As one flower we will be, as one flower and nothing more. The same verse will sing, at the same step will dance. Like an ear of corn will wave, like an ear of corn and nothing more. Your name is Rosa and I'm Esperanza, but your name will forget because we will be a dance on the hill and nothing more. In this poem, to unite means fundamentally to love, and with it, to have hope. The opposite, not to have hope, would be close to the other. That love that cultivates the round starts by shaking hands, a gesture that we know is not so simple after the pandemic. Shaking hands or giving your hand is the first sign of trust, which implies accepting to touch and be touched by the other, to be touched physically and emotionally. The physical contact in the round produces an emotional unity that Mistral compares to the flower and the ear of corn, natural elements indicative that the poet considers union as an authentic gesture of the human being.
Porque está motivada por la esperanza. La ronda arma un colectivo que comienza a compartir un interés por un mundo posible, donde la confianza es el lazo primero. En dicha unidad, Rosa, la imagen de la belleza del estado actual, olvidará su nombre, porque está buscando una simetría entre las humanas. La unión propuesta en esta ronda está dirigida a las mujeres. Considerando esto, me sumo a lo afirmado por la crítica Andrea Casals respecto al feminismo de Mistral. El solo hecho de que en 1924, dice Casals, pusieran las necesidades e intereses de niñas y mujeres en primer plano, cuando apenas recibían educación formal y ni siquiera tenían derecho a voto, constituye una subversión. No es que el mundo por venir se imagine desde la mente en Mistral, sino que se experimenta en el momento de la igualdad de las unas con otras, que es la ronda. El poema parece decir: es suficiente que me des la mano para que advenga otro mundo. Mistral explicó su adopción por la ronda, tal como lo ha estudiado la crítica Alida McNichols, que nos informa que la poeta incluso lo vincula con Dante, quien, estoy siguiendo a Alida, puso la ronda en el centro del paraíso, y que la ronda está desde el inicio de los tiempos, cuando los salvajes bailaban en torno a la hoguera. De esta forma, McNichols sintetiza que para Mistral en la ronda el conocimiento vernacular con el conocimiento intelectual se encuentran en el círculo. O Mistral hace que se encuentren en el círculo lo cotidiano y lo extraordinario, lo natural y lo divino, lo instintivo y lo razonado. Entonces, la ronda produce la unidad de las personas y de los tiempos. La unidad se produce cuando comienza a decir el mismo verso y a ejecutar el mismo paso que realizan todos los participantes de la ronda. Dame la mano es incorporarte a un nosotros y vivir la experiencia de una comunidad que privilegia el acontecer de subir la montaña, es decir, reactivar el rito andino. En esta danza, el cuerpo personal y social está reunido y desplegado a la vez, siguiendo un camino no lineal, sino curvo y serpenteado, amerindio, como en la cordillera de los Andes. La ronda es el primer paso para el alzamiento de los pueblos en Mistral, tal como lo expresa la ronda Tierra Chilena. Danzamos en tierra chilena, la tierra más verde de huertos, la tierra más rubia de mies, la tierra más roja de viñas, qué dulce que roza los pies. Es bella y por bella queremos sus pastos de rondas alvear, es libre y por libre deseamos su rostro de cantos bañar. Mañana abriremos sus rocas, la haremos viñedo y pomar, mañana alzaremos sus cuerpos, hoy solo queremos danzar. La tierra chilena es descrita como un vergel donde se producen vinos y mieses o cereales, y es una de las razones para sentirla como un espacio nutricio. La esperanza es construir un mañana donde el nosotros cultivará los viñedos y los pomares o manzanares. Esta es una imagen del campesino, dueño del propio territorio, como lo pensaba la poeta, quien estaba a favor de la reforma agraria. En el poema Mistral establece la unidad de la ronda como primera fase frente al alzamiento de los pueblos. Entonces, previo al alzamiento, la escritora propone formar una unidad comunitaria, ocupar la montaña, no abandonarla, y dignificar las culturas andinas que habitan ese espacio. La biografía personal y colectiva está atravesada por la experiencia a través de los sentidos corporales que son recuperados por Mistral en ternura. Este título se vuelve significativo al comprender la ternura como una forma de vivir por y en relación al otro, con confianza. Mirar la niñez desde la ternura implica considerar que la infancia está escrita en una cadena biográfica colectiva, que en el caso de la situación latinoamericana tiene por un espacio cultural privilegiado la cordillera de los Andes. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias a ti, Magda, por esta presentación.
Thank you, Magda, for this presentation on one of our greatest poets in Chile, as well as more broadly in the Spanish language. A presentation that also makes very good connections in several directions, Mistral's poetry and the geography, nature, and culture, the Andean territory and people, but also with childhood, which is evidently a main pathway of connectivity in this Congress. Well, we remind you that you can go sending in your questions via the chat function. And while people dare do this, I'd like to ask you, Magda, in your presentation, time and time again, we see a concept that reappears, the memory of sound. Could you elaborate on this a bit further? What do you understand by the memory of sound? And how do you see it in other arts? Thank you, Felipe. And there is a film called Year Zero, and where the city is totally destroyed and the child walks through the ruins and there seems to be no sound. And the voice of Hitler appears. He's already dead, but however, it's like his voice is alive. And so the character could die, but the voice, those voices we hear continue. So I believe that the voices and music, sounds occupy an area that musicians call like a ghostly place, which is very interesting. For example, in some films by Woody Allen, her mother appears talking from heaven. Like she's in heaven, but her voice, we can still hear it. And so there are voices that are everyday voices, and some help us live, but others kill us. Like some people say, a word by you will save my life. So it's the voice as a healing voice. So human culture is so broad, especially in terms of voices, because it seems that voices are a central part of our constitution as humans. Well, I was thinking of this relationship that you established between voice, sounds, and the sacred. And what you said, I really liked it. This idea of the ronda, or the round, as a rite, as a childhood inscribed in a much greater biographical memory. And so now, while I was listening to you, I was thinking of the latest book by Gaston Sublet, the Chilean writer. And he says something very nice there about these rites. And he says that a rite is a visible movement with that is directed towards an invisible movement. And so I was thinking now, how could the ronda of Mistral become a rite and link to that movement of the invisible, in the words of Sublet? Could you elaborate further on that? Well, how beautifully you said that. I share that idea that you have put across, that a rite creates an invisible force, and there when you finish secondary school, you go through a graduation, there's a ceremony, like a rite. There's a rite for everything to mark the end of the year, the arrival of the new year. And so it could be all a mere continuity, but no, these ceremonies, these rites mark something invisible. It does a number of things, and to which you can attribute a tremendous invisible power. And I think that Mistral, when she says, first we do the round and then we make people, she is speaking of this invisible force. In the measure that I'm able to be with others in an experience of trust and of unity, That will lead to the revolution. The ronda is a beginning for another major revolt. Yes, that's exactly it. I would like to read to you a comment. Perhaps it's not a question, but I do think it is interesting to mention it. People are saying, thank you very much, Magda, for this presentation. Bringing the sound and image to academic work and also your reading of the work of Mistral is extremely powerful, highly significant also the how a circular movement helps us to return to the body, what is material, and which is how the opening ceremony of this Congress began. And so it is interesting, this full round to the body, to what is material.
Relevan también la
And also they relay the relevance of bringing to congresses such as this work that focuses on cultural production and literature without a surname, without a label, which is what so many of us who work in the literary system for young people do. And so focus on these specific productions created specifically for childhood. And so we would like to continue picking up on questions or comments such as this via the chat function coming from YouTube. And here I have some other ideas. I would also like to add regarding the body, an artist called Cecilia Vicuña. She's a Chilean artist, very well known internationally. And when she speaks, she reads poetry and other things. And it's like wool that you use to weave people together. And the mere fact that with a piece of wool, she ties you up and ties you to the next, this helps you to feel the itchiness of the wool and feel your body in this way. And how today the idea of the body is at the heart. And instead of teaching us other ways of using our body, we're taught how to ban and immobilize our body. It's all punishment, sanctions. It's a very precarious. And so what should we do for people to be vaccinated? Well, you need to punish them. Whoever does not get the jab must be punished. So punishment is the solution to everything. So what if during this pandemic, instead of greeting like that, which is so sad, we could greet by rubbing our backs together? But that would not lead to contagion, but it is like putting yourself in the shoes of Cecilia Vicuña and Gabriela Mistral, doing things differently. Well, but thinking of these cultural aspects, there is one thing that I would like to ask, picked up from Lorena. She says, all cultures dance. However, our culture is taking a distance from this. How can we return to that ancestral value, considering all the differences that we are seeing today? And also, I will leave you with another question, which is more of the biography of Mistral. Juan Carlos asks, how could we explain the contradiction in Gabriela? On the one hand, a deep love for childhood in her poetry, but in her personal life, she was very ambiguous, Carlos says here, in terms of her own maternity. Well, an interesting questions. I think that to recover dance in each one of us, we must remove the value appreciation. That's the first thing we'd have to say. It's not just a point of dancing well or poorly, but rather putting your body in an attitude of moving together. And I think that leads to certain recoveries. We could begin to dance salsa, mambo, and so many other things that would help us loosen up. And there are many could help us out, but not saying, no, the Chileans are all stiff, because if you stay with that label, you will never again move. But we need a culture of reward, not punishment. You must go out to the ronda, and not what in Chilean they call the ruedo, which is the noose. And because I have another thing that I like here, always beginning with yourself. How
¿Cómo, por ejemplo, cuando los letrados hacen esa pregunta, porque nos gusta ser como buenos, ¿cómo ayudo al pobre? El
we
pobre
always like that, how to help the poor, people around us. It could be the people who help you out with the garden, or the people who go to pick up your garbage. You need to dare to take a step to use your hands to express things and overcome the punishing culture, like Chile has done with Gabriela Mistral, because she was not serious, although they like to depict her as someone who was very serious and grave.
Después, sobre el tema de la,
And then the biography, I'd like to begin the other way around. First of all, reivindicating the right to a consequence.
Está todo el tema de Gigi también en esa pregunta, ¿cierto?
In that question, for me, she was a mother. An adopted child, for me, makes you both mother and father. And so, with many difficulties, because I think that being a mother or father, I don't think this is easy. It's difficult. I think the hegemonic culture has dictated that if you're only a mother, like our culture dictates for women, you will be a good mother. But when you have other objects of desire, your work or a number of other things, and when the children see that you have other objects of desire, it complicates things. And maybe this of the yin has to do with that we are subjects with multiple objects of desire, loving desires or good taste, because she always selected smart women, women who had something to say. And one who wrote, she was a translator, the sculptor, Laura Rodi, who was very young. Today, she would be accused of a pedophile. The other, who was the first diploma holder, a woman with many desires, and so her maternity has been complex. Well, very interesting to address this from another viewpoint, because Mistral's biography has always been seen in different ways. I would now like to return to the rounds because there are a couple of questions that I would like to ask you. One, by Evelyn Ariste. And she says, could you say something further about the relationship between Mistral's rounds and the identity of Chilean children today, indigenous as well as non-indigenous? And I would like to know, abroad, do people still listen to Mistral? And Andina de Marco also asked something about the rounds. She researches lullabies by well-known authors, and thinking of these things of the rite, the dance, the weaving, linking with the bodily and the invisible, she was thinking of the relevance of reiteration, which is marked like a feature of many child literary works, and also this literature of Mistral. What place do you think is being given to reiteration in these texts by Mistral and in general in the text of the Ronda when Guillermo Gustavista is there? He repeats many phrases, but he also looks for variations. And so maybe you could refer to these two ideas about the round. Well, very good questions.
Yo pienso que falta darle
I think
la vocación de alegría a los textos de Mistral, porque no
what
sé, pocos
we're not looking at the joyful side to what Mistral says. Maybe someone has a vocation for sadness and just went to the library and did not want to know anything about the round. So I think that to recover Mistral, we must recover the festivity part of Mistral, especially the Andean festivities. This was sung in a masterly fashion by Pascual y la Vaca. Pascual y la Vaca does it, but I've seen other ways of putting music to Mistral in a way that María Meliflo. Meliflo, children's footsteps. I think that is very distant from the meaning of the text, because the text is a social protest. And so it's more like heavy metal, if you like. The same with the other one called Fear. She's shouting it, I don't want my little girl to do this or that or the other. And so I think that there, what we need is for our unity among literary critics and others be greater. We have walked very separate paths in the case of Mistral, and these pathways must now come together. And when they do, we will have, it will reach people far more deeply. And the second question, I link it to poetic art. I think reiteration in poetry is always. Let me give you an example with Neruda. Just listen to him, and he says, it happens that I tire of being man, like a figure made of felt. And then you have watching around. It happens that I tire of being a man, traveling through movies like a figure made of felt. It's, no matter how you read it, it's always sonorous and thematic. It's reiteration, the pause and the silence is the basis of the genre, far beyond the children's poetry. Yeah, for example, Gonzalo Rojas. Maybe I'm wrong. Yes, of course. Muslo. Everything I touch. Muslo. Beyond the last muslo. The U. the último in Spanish, which is the repetition of the sound between one term and the other. Well, just to speak of egos, you don't have to be a hero. Maybe I'm too conservative, she says. But there is something there with reiteration in poetry. And in fact, a scholar defines poetry as isotopy. It's isotopic, a matter of repetition at all levels, sound, grammar, but it is a lot of repetition. But we have to communicate that. We need to communicate that sort of thing.
And this, what you're saying, takes us back to the musical substrate. Well, there is a very interesting question by Isabel Ibaceta, because in this conference, we established a dialogue between academics from literature for children and academics of the general literary system. So he wanted to know what contribution could be made to the reading of Gabriela Mistral from the general literary field. I think that the child literature has progressed a lot. And this has also to do with the fact that today, I think there is some child subjectivity. The child is a subject, and as such is linked to some discourses. And the different agents that have dealt with that are doing this quite well. The child is not an old child. And I think they need some joy, and there Mistral plays a role. You have to read Mistral with that sense of party, of joy. And we are in the Andean region. We are not aware of that because we have been told that what is Andean is at the Puna, very high up. Foreigners come here and say, look what you have there. What exists from Magellan region, there the Andes range is born and goes through all of Latin America. I think we need an Andean conscious. Mistral can be help on that. And we have to share with our students going up the mountain. That should be an experience of us as educators. But you have to get out of the classroom. And I think students are on the lead in that. How I'm going to be taking care of the students. I say, oh, a child's going to fall. I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to be sued. And well, there is a whole soap opera in my head. But we have to go up the mountains. We have to listen to the quena, the flute, and we have to recover the Andean world, which is on the land we walk on. So Mistral is based on the territory. The professor from Cyprus said speaks about the territory and explains about the planes that fly over his territory. Childhood has a territory. It's not that you have one childhood, but you have childhoods with a corresponding territory, and every territory has its beauty, and our beauty is the Andean territory. And that can be related to one of the ideas you mentioned during your conference, the idea that children recover their territory through those texts of Mistral, for example. And on many occasions, while living in a country with thousands of kilometers of Andes Range or sea, we give our back to those geographic and cultural spaces. That relationship between childhood and territory is very interesting. There is another question, Magda, that sees the round from a different place. Clara Tirado says, what about the Oriental approach of Mistral? Is there some syncretism there?
Como dice la persona que pregunta, Mistral era
Well,
totalmente...
Mistral was totally heterodox. She mixed Buddhism, Judaism. She made a mixture of all. Aníbal compares the round, the ronda, with everything that has to do with the dancers that worship Dionysus. And those dances were done by women. And Rojo said, most of the rounds aim at women. And Alida says, yes, but to a specific type of women who are the ones that dare dancing wildly. Letting yourself go has to do with a culture, more Oriental cultures that value dance to attain ecstasies. Because in the dance, you feel that the body doesn't belong to you. It's like when you are on a swing, your body cannot be controlled. And it is there where the hetero standard tells you, abandon the round, the ronda, you're going to fall. But you have to go on. That happens when you're dancing with your partner and you lose control. Control, well, it's not there when the body manifests itself. The beauty of this bodily manifestation. I don't know if you have fallen, but once I fell and see myself on the soil, well, I wondered why those feelings that came to me, because your rationality prevents you from thinking of your body falling. You think that your body is with that illusion of control. And disease gets you out of there, death too. When you have a stomachache, your body doesn't belong to you anymore. This goes beyond your mind. It is yours and it's not yours. Our body speaks much more than we do always.
Estaba pensando en esto
I was thinking about the Oriental influence. And all of those readings by Mistral that went beyond what a rural teacher would have read. She wanted to learn about Buddhism, Oriental religions. So someone that goes beyond her own space in terms of reading. And thinking about the quote of Andrea Casals about how a woman that almost a century ago was thinking from a different place the image of the woman or the image of childhoods in her poetic texts, as well as in the texts that she published in newspapers, magazines. So that image of a woman that is continuously moving the borders of her time. Yes, I mean,
salga y se meta, por ejemplo, en la teosofía, como en el
what
caso
happened for someone to start reading on theosophy? I think the offense.
la ofensa es benéfica también. O sea,
Offense is beneficial. When she tried to be orderly and help at school, being the perfect child at school, and she was told that she was stealing the soybean. Or maybe you die there, or you say, look, there is something beyond. And Mistral was also, was always expanding. She had a position in relation to cinema and education. At that time, she wanted cinema to be included in child education. So she was always open-minded, and I relate this to rejection. There have always been a process of rejection. So we can say thank you very much to those who offend us, because they opened the door to another world. If we had been always applauded, we would never be where we are. And there is a book, Poema de Chile, and she was called the one that appeared when someone wants to climb the ladder. And there is a very ugly name, as if it is bad for you to go up in the class ladder. Everyone wants to live well, but she was qualified about that, and she responds to that. So in your letters, all of those offenses appear, but those offenses are responded by her work. She is not sort of fighting one-on-one, but in her writings, she responds everything.
Gracias, Magda. En vista del
Thank you,
tiempo,
Magda. For the sake of time, I'm going to close, and I would like to finish by leaving you with a comment that I think is so beautiful. It will take us a bit away from what we were saying, but it forges a relationship that is so powerful. Isabel says, I thought of female dances that have been in the protest since October the 18th, since the time when in Chile there was the social outburst a couple of years ago. So there is there a relationship. I don't know whether you would like to say anything about it. I fully agree.
I fully agree with las tesis.
Me interesó también, porque me interesa todo.
And it interested me because I'm very interested in all movements that have to do with dance. I would leave it at that because I think it is something that is very nice. And also I would like to thank you, Felipe, for moderating. And I thank you, Magda, for the ideas that you've left us with. Coming from the field of literary study in general, but with so many ideas that are left in the air here to be picked up by those of us who work in the field of literature for children and young people. So thank you, Magda, very much. Thank you all very much, and bye. Well, we thank everyone who has been with us today and cordially invite you to take part in the sessions that will continue in the IRSCL 2021. To see this, please visit the website and there you will see what is coming. And so everyone who is part of the Aesthetic and Pedagogical Entanglements to the closing ceremony tomorrow or Friday at 12:15 Chilean time. Access to the ceremony is in the WUVA platform. Thank you very much for being with us today, and